Welcome to Seakeeper's Voyages of Discovery. I'm your host, Katie Sheehan, and today we're heading into the deep. Not just figuratively this time, but literally, to the least explored, most mysterious realm on Earth, the deep sea. Today, I have the absolute honor of chatting with two remarkable women whose work has redefined how we see and map the deepest reaches of our planet. Dr. Dawn Wright, renowned oceanographer, deep sea mapper, and chief scientist at Esri, and Susan Casey, best-selling author of The Underworld, whose reporting takes us into the lives of the explorers and innovators uncovering the ocean's most extreme depths. Together, we'll confront the myths, marvel at the creatures, and explore why this uncharted world matters now more than ever. As climate change and human activity push deeper into the ocean, understanding what lies beneath is no longer just about curiosity. It's about survival. Get ready for eerie encounters, cutting-edge science, and stories from the seafloor. This is the Deep Sea Revealed. Let's dive in. All right, good morning, Dawn and Susan. Thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Pleasure.
Good morning.
I'm so excited to have you on today. This is such a great opportunity to chat with two people who have very similar experiences, but very different backgrounds. So I'm excited to hear about your journeys. And of course, we are talking about your journeys to the depths of the ocean today. So Dr. Wright, you are an author, the chief scientist at Esri, and throughout your career, you played a key role in creating the first GIS data model for the oceans. But before that, you were a little girl growing up on the island of Maui. So how would you say this upbringing shaped your career and your love for the ocean?
Well, I couldn't be more pleased to be on a podcast with another Maui girl, Susan Casey, and I'm just fangirling my head off right now because
Back at you.
Susan is one of the people I really admire and love her writing. So for those of us who are island people, the ocean is just a natural place of not only habitation, but to me, I grew up thinking of it and knowing it as a sacred place, especially having spent so many years as a child in Hawaii. And we learned quite a bit about Hawaiian history and Hawaiian lore. And if anyone has seen the film Moana or Moana 2, there's a lot there that resonates and that you can experience in terms of how we as islanders feel about the ocean from those films. That was my experience as well. I loved being in the ocean every day. And you couple that with a steady diet of Jacques Cousteau, The Wonderful World of Jacques Cousteau on Sunday nights, as well as Disney's programming on Sunday nights. And I'm going to date myself because I experienced that as a child in the 60s. So that was our television diet. And it was very easy to dream of exploring the ocean, studying the ocean as a scientific topic. That's what really grew on me as the years went by. There was the fascination and then just the interest in it in terms of studying it as a career.
Mm-hmm. I love that you are able to reflect back on Moana as a really cool piece of modern storytelling that you can connect with to share your upbringing. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the storytelling aspect of all this in just a minute. And Susan, so speaking of books, Dawn held up your book, The Underworld, which I also just finished reading before this podcast, and I loved every second of it. Actually, I listened to the audiobook, and I thought it was amazing because you voice your own audiobook. And I thought that was such a special experience to hear from you exactly the emotion that you wanted to convey to your readers. So speaking of that, you have quite a multifaceted career. You're a former editor-in-chief for the Oprah magazine and for Sports Illustrated Women, and you've published quite a few nonfiction books, including The Underworld, Journeys to the Depths of the Ocean. So many of these nonfiction works have a significant focus on the world of ocean life and adventure. What experiences in your life do you think have fostered this deep connection that you have to the ocean?
It's a question I get a lot. First, let me just go ahead right back at Dawn and say, I'm just so happy to be here with you. I'm a huge admirer and watched from the sidelines in complete delight as Dawn became, I think, one of the first women to go to the bottom of the Hadal Zone. I don't know if you heard me in your head just clapping wildly. That was me. I grew up in Canada, about as far away from the ocean as you could get in North America, in Toronto, but we had lakes and rivers. And for me, it was really just this out of the box obsession with water. And I can remember as a very young child, one of my first conscious memories was just being completely hypnotized by a swimming pool that was lit up at night. And I would stand at my family's cottage and just stare at fish for hours and hours and hours. I was pretty scared of them. But out of the blue, I just pronounced one day that I was going to become a competitive swimmer. And even though I really couldn't swim, and that commenced a long career, and I still do compete at open water swimming. I think that swimming, even in a pool, has made me very comfortable around extreme aquatic environments. It's really on land where I have the problems. And then just from the beginning of starting to spend more time in the ocean and then writing my first book, which is about the Farallon Islands and the great white sharks that are resident there off the coast of San Francisco, I just became besotted with the ocean. And I see my career now as I work for her.
That's lovely. So this begs the question, how long have you two known each other? And what do you think is the common thread in your relationship with one another?
This is our first time actually connecting face to face, even though it's not in person, unfortunately. But we have corresponded over social media. And as I said, I'm just a huge fan. And Dawn has been so generous and supportive, not only to me, but to everybody, many, many other people, scientists and non-scientists in this space.
Oh, thank you. And I'm a huge fan of Susan's. Also, I first got Susan's book about waves in the ocean. For those of us who are ocean scientists, when there are books or there are modes of expression, such as the way that Susan is able to weave together these stories of the ocean, it's so valuable and it's so precious. And you get to feel as though you know the author very well through the writing. And I, too, listened to The Underworld as an audiobook. And so I feel as though I really know Susan, and we've never been in a room together as well. So this is just a thrill for me to just even be in the same video audio session with you, Susan.
Likewise.
And we will have to have a bubbly drink of some sort on the beach on Maui sometime.
I'm in.
So, Dr. Wright, I also wanted to discuss your book, Mapping the Deep. I read this in preparation, and as methodical and technical as it is, you're still able to convey so much emotion through this book. I thought it was really lovely to see the science and the personal interconnect, your personal experiences and the communities that you've been involved with in your experiences. So can you tell me a little bit, before we dive into the science, what inspired you to write a book about your experiences and mapping the deep?
Well, thank you for asking for that, because Mapping the Deep is completely different kind of book. I am not a professional writer. I'm not an author in that sense. I am not in Susan Casey's realm at all. And Mapping the Deep is a collaborative project. In fact, the book says by Dawn Wright with Esri Press. And so this is really an Esri Press project. Esri is a software company. We also have a press that has evolved into quite a nice little publishing house. At first, it started off as a place where we could publish our software documentation and our tutorials and those types of software books, but it has grown into a little house that publishes atlases, research monographs, and Mapping the Deep is one of the first trade books that Esri Press has undertaken. And it was really Esri Press who came to me after the Challenger Deep Dive and said, we want to tell the story of the Challenger Deep Dive with you. We realize that you have no time to write a book, first author on your own because of your schedule. So we want to work on this book with you. We want to draw from the writings that you have done on these topics of the ocean more generally. And so we want this book to be the story of your Challenger Deep Dive, but to make it into a story arc where it becomes the story of you, what your background is, and also the story of other women. So there's snippets of stories of other women who have explored the deep, who have mapped the deep, and also a call to action, if you will, in terms of not only how do we map the deep, but why is this so important? Why does it matter to everyone? So my book is collaboratively put together. It's written in the third person because of that, because it draws from so many different sources. And it's Esri Press that is weaving together my stories and these other stories. And it also has an audio version that is read by a professional narrator, but there are insets in the book where I do speak in the first person, as you know, and on the audio version of the book, I do read those parts of the book, but it's a different kind of project. And Esri Press wanted this to come out within a year or two of the dive. And so with this relationship, with this collaboration, that was the only way that we could do this. And so that's what we have.
I thought it was an amazing amalgamation of your experiences and the experiences of other women in STEM, and also the technical aspects of it. It was very knowledgeable. I learned so much about these specifics of the deep sea. And with that, I would love if you could maybe provide a definition, because we're using this term deep sea. Are there metrics or sort of classifications to define what the deep sea is?
Well, I'll chime in from the scientific community's standpoint. Ocean scientists tend to consider the deep sea to be at 200 meters or deeper. So, for instance, I'm part of the Deep Ocean Observing Strategy, which is a boundary organization of different universities and organizations, nonprofits that study the deep sea and that advocate for the deep sea. And we have all come to consensus on that definition, 200 meters or deeper.
That's great to have a solid number that we can use to define those boundaries.
Can I just insert here, too, that Esri and Dawn's work, it provides another really important, I think right now, even arguably, one of the most effective strategies for communication is to show graphics and to be able to visualize via maps and other infographics that sometimes a picture really is worth 1,000 words. I often tell audiences that people think of the deep ocean and they know it's huge, but they have no idea how immense it is. And Esri has done amazing graphics showing just how deep the ocean is and how far down the Mariana Trench, the Challenger Deep is. But also, if you think of the Earth as a biosphere, as a three-dimensional living space, 98% of that is ocean. So here we are, we're up here having our podcast on our 2%, and everything you see is our 2%. And of that 98% of ocean, 95% of it is deep ocean. The water's below 200 meters. And so when you think about the deep ocean, I think often to people, it means it's just something over there. They're never going to go there. They may not see it. They may not think about it except to think, oh, it's scary. It isn't just a part of our planet. It isn't just a large part of our planet. It is our planet.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree more. It is. We are a water planet. And Susan and I are both good friends with one of the most iconic explorers of our age, Victor Vescovo, and he has said similarly also that we are the aliens. We
right,
people who are on the dry terrestrial parts of the planet. We're the weirdos.
That's exactly right.
And we're pretty scary, too, if we're going to bring that in, the types of things that we as a human species do. Ooh, we're the scariest of all, in my view.
Absolutely.
I agree.
Yeah.
And the late microbiologist Katrina Edwards, who studied, there's even an ecosystem beneath the ocean floor called the deep biosphere. And there's microbial life. Dawn, you might know the exact number. I think we're down to 2,000 meters or something. We know that there is microbial life. We don't know how deep, but we're getting down there and there is still life. And she said, we think of life as sort of equates it to sunlight, but most life on this planet lives in the darkness 100% of the time.
Absolutely. And that sub-seafloor microbial life that you referred to, that's at these seafloor spreading centers, as far as we know thus far. And most of those places on the ocean floor are at 2,500 to 4,000 meters. And these bacteria and other forms of life are in the crust of the ocean in super hot conditions, well over 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Talk about resilience. They're also the subject of biopharmaceutical research because there could be a cure for cancer or COVID or something in the genetics and the dynamics of how that very strange to us life form is able to live.
One of the things the deep ocean has really taught us in terms of knowledge vast leaps in knowledge is that life has more tricks up her sleeve than we realize.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that leads me to a really great question. Okay, so you both have dove to the bottom of the Challenger Deep.
No. Dawn has.
Dawn has. Okay, Susan, sorry. How far have you dove into the abyssal zone?
About half as deep as Dawn, to the base of Kemehuakanaloa, which is, one day, it's an active volcano off the southern tip of the Big Island that will one day, long into the future, that will become the next Hawaiian island.
Oh, that's amazing. Can you describe your experience, Susan, of what you saw on that dive and how it made you feel?
It would have been super interesting to have gone to 10,000 plus meters. We went to about 5,100 meters, Victor Vescovo and I. Both Don and I dived in his sub, which was an absolutely revolutionary machine that was created by Triton Submarines, a company in Florida that I describe as the Apple of submersible design. It's just meticulously safe and very, very innovative and well designed. So it was about a 2.5 hour descent. You're just dropping, and throughout you see bioluminescent life flash by. And I had dived to a shallower depth in a sub that had a plexiglass hull. So you really see the bioluminescence in a sub like that. But this one, because it goes full ocean depth, has smaller viewports. So I would say that as we were going down and Victor was doing his piloting things and checking instruments and such, I was really feeling the place. And one thing that you understand right away when you get into a submersible is as you descend through the uppermost layer, you get into this realm at the top of the twilight zone, the uppermost layer of the deep ocean, where all the spectrum has fallen out except for the blue wavelength and the indigo wavelength. And it's just a color you don't see above the surface. And everybody just trips out on this. It's like a narcotic experience to see this color. It's, to quote William Beebe, it's more like an emotion than a color. And then you're in the darkness, but the sub has lights. And as separate yourself from the surface, all of the visual cues that you see at the ocean surface, waves, wind, turbulence, those are gone. And the water is quite clear except for marine snow. And because the sub descends faster than the marine snow, it looks like it's going upwards, but it isn't. It's going downwards. And you just get this sense that this is not space. This is a matrix of life. This is the womb and the cauldron of creation and the archive of genetic creativity for the earth. Every square inch of water is filled with dynamic, interesting life that in many cases we haven't seen before. And as you start to descend through the layers, through the midnight zone, through the abyssal zone, we went almost to the bottom of the abyssal zone. And then, of course, below that is the realm that Dawn dived into, the hadal zone, the deepest part of the ocean. And you really get a sense of serenity, but also of gravitas. So I felt like I could feel a presence of life, almost like a pulse or a heartbeat, but it's subtler than that. But it is welcoming and serene. But the thing I love, I think, the most about it is that in order to go there, we have to practice extreme humility. You can't go down there and think we're in charge. It is paws up, her rules, no negotiation. And that to me is an ecstatic experience, because to be part of nature as opposed to think that we have some sort of bizarre dominion over it, it's a relief. It's like a beautiful thing to feel that you're part of the scheme and fabric of life. And we have this incredibly rare privilege to see it and to be part of it. So yeah, you never forget where you are. You never forget that there are 500 atmospheres on your head. And we saw an active volcano and venting and a very amazing microbe that is endemic to that volcano called Mare Profundus. And it's a microbe that they think they might find on Europa or one of the other ocean worlds in our planet that ingests iron and excretes rust. So when you stir it up, it's almost like fire billowed around the sub, which was really amazing.
Oh, that's incredible. I've heard that kind of comparison between the deep ocean and space so often, but then you hear from people who've actually traveled to the deep ocean and it's not a vacuum. So I'd love to hear your analogy.
Opposite.
Yeah, that it's pulsing with life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Dawn, you've been a bit deeper than Susan. You've been down to the hadal zone, down to 11,000 meters or almost 11,000 meters. Can you describe what you saw as you descended?
Well, Susan's description was just brilliant, just beautiful. And I had the same feelings. because that descending through the zone of light where you can see things, that euphotic zone that most people can relate to the ocean in terms of that upper part. And I loved her description of the color. For me, it's the blue that you see as you are sinking ever deeper into the twilight zone where you're going through the gray and then pitch black. And for me, I saw the bioluminescence as well. I was in a different part of the Pacific Ocean, because another thing that's amazing about these dives is that every dive, there's a little bit of a different experience depending on where you are in the world ocean and the creatures that you're going to see. And in Susan's case, she descended into volcanic and hydrothermal activity, which was not our experience in Challenger Deep, thank goodness, because we were diving into an active collision zone on the ocean floor, a subduction zone, a place where there's not just a hot spot that's burning through the Earth's crust, such as where Susan was. It's not a place where the ocean is spreading apart, which is where we were talking about the subsurface biosphere, these seafloor spreading centers. We were in the tectonic opposite of that, where two plates, not separating, but they're crashing together. At any rate, our descent was 4 hours to get to approximately 10,919 meters. That was our maximum depth, a little shallower than Victor's record, which is 10,935 meters, I believe. We'll have to check that. But he has the record for being the deepest human being. Astronauts often talk about the overview effect because they are up in space and they're seeing a huge portion of planet Earth. They're seeing the planet from that viewpoint. For me, I felt an underview effect, which is similar to what Susan has described. You think about the pressure that you're under. For me, I think about that maybe for 2 seconds. And I don't worry about that because you're in the safest of vehicles, and a vehicle like the limiting factor, which is now called the Bakunawa, which is designed to give you every protection and comfort even. But I had the feeling of visiting a very special place that's part of our planet that no one has ever seen. No one had ever been to that exact latitude, longitude, and depth, that X, Y, and Z that we had landed on. And you think, okay, we are as insignificant could be. We are just a little point that has descended into the vastness of the ocean to this one small location. But at the same time, we are descending into this community. This is part of planet Earth as well. This is a very precious part of planet Earth. And because we have descended into this space, we're part of this little community too. Because we saw life at that extreme depth, at full ocean depth. And we'll probably talk about this as we move on in our conversation, but we saw little shrimp-like creatures, little amphipods and sea cucumbers and sea pigs and very, very, very tiny, tiny creatures. But it's a thriving ecosystem down at that most extreme part of our planet, 16,000 pounds per square inch, complete darkness. But it just hit me as we landed that we are part of the totality of life, not only in this little space, but on the entire planet. We are all interconnected. It's all a miracle. We all matter. So aside from the science, Victor took me down in his submersible as well, and we were actually there to do a scientific experiment with a prototype mapping system. So after getting over the wonder of being in the place, and for Victor, he calls Challenger Deep his happy place because he's been there more than anyone else. But once we get past that, it was the work that we had to do in terms of testing that instrument and recording and observing as much as we could in terms of not only the biology, but also the geology of that very special place.
So why would it matter to map the deepest point in the ocean? You know, we have a general idea of how deep it is, but what is the benefit of having a more defined map of that area?
Asking this question of the ocean, I think, is similar to why do we need a detailed map of the United States of America? We have a general idea of what this place that we live in looks like, but there's so many ways that we need to use or understand the United States. And I'll think of, for instance, the interstate highway system. We need very, very detailed maps of the terrain of the country in order to maintain and to place roadways so that we can get from one place to another, so that goods and services can get from one place to another, so that people can be safe given something that's happening in one place. How do we get to that place as quickly as possible? And for me, I think of mapping the ocean as the same way. Given that this is a water planet, we have infrastructure, we have beauty, we have food, we have everything that the ocean provides to us that we need to map and know about it as much in detail as possible. This is our planet. We want to be able to use it correctly and sustainably. There are parts of our daily life that we don't even realize depends on our maps of the ocean. For instance, this podcast and the fact that we are talking to each other from different parts of the country, the fact that your podcast can go to anywhere on the planet, on the internet, and that's due to submarine cables. We have a whole vast network of those very important pieces of infrastructure that cross the entire world ocean and rely on our detailed maps, not only to maintain the cables that are there, but to find the best places to put new cables. These cables are actually becoming a political item in terms of if there is a war between two countries, what is one country going to do? What has Russia done to Ukraine? They have attacked their submarine cables. What has the recent Tonga eruption, that island nation, it cut them off from the world because it sliced through their submarine cable. So that's one example. We could fill up the whole podcast with others, but I'll stop at that one example.
People think about satellites all the time, but I think it's something like 2% of the world's data flows through. Satellites much slower. None of the really urgent information like real-time financial markets and things like that go through satellites. They all go through the seafloor.
Yeah, it's 95% of our internet traffic, of our data transmission, of our ability to communicate or to make all of these transactions. It's all through the submarine cable system.
It's amazing how much our life on terra firma depends on what goes on in the ocean, and we don't even know about it, maybe.
Yeah, or we don't think about it.
So, Don, that was a really great segue because the podcast episode that we're releasing after this episode is actually with Seabed 2030. Now, you have been a champion for this project. They are attempting to map the entire ocean floor by the year 2030. And we were chatting about how the map of the ocean floor is kind of a blueprint for all ocean science. You can't really understand what we don't know. We can't study it. We can't find ways to save it. So what in both of your careers have you found diving in the ocean that you just came back up and you needed to share with people? You needed to tell the story of something that you saw down there. Do you have any examples of this?
Well, 4 books that were all about 110,000 words long. I mean, just about everything, really, I would say. One of the things I was really excited to communicate with people about in the Underworld was, you don't realize this necessarily, but again, back to this fact that it's 98% of the living space of Earth. 80% of the world's volcanism occurs down there. The largest geological features on the planet are down there. Different schemas for how life survives. There's more than photosynthesis. There's chemosynthesis. There are lost ships, millions of them, stories from civilizations past. There is just everything there. And not to mention the infinite trove of scientific, cultural, and even spiritual knowledge that we can glean from it that will help us survive in this time of flux. We cannot possibly navigate into the future if we don't know how this planet works. Without the deep ocean, we can't.
Speaking of Seabed 2030, I'm a member of the Seabed 2030 Strategic Advisory Group, and Esri is one of the major industrial partners of Seabed 2030 because for all of these reasons, and the Seabed 2030 site has more information on what Susan has just laid out very nicely. And it's really like trying to take a bath. So many of us love to take baths rather than showers. You don't have a bathtub to put the water in. You don't have any foundation for that activity. And we certainly don't have a foundation for the biology, the chemistry, the understanding of climate is something that's not really talked about very much with regard to the deep ocean and the seabed. But the heat that is governing our day-to-day weather and our long-term climate, that heat circulates throughout all parts of the ocean. In fact, when Victor and I were in Challenger Deep, we experienced bottom currents that blew us off course. And those bottom currents were part of the overall engine that is circulating heat throughout the entirety of the ocean. And of course, it has ramifications on the surface. But every single day, there is something amazing. In fact, I was so fortunate to have done most of my submersible diving in the famous Alvin submersible. And the Alvin submersible was part of a fantastic story that just happened recently, where divers in Alvin were the very first to actually see a volcanic eruption in progress at a seafloor spreading center. That is one of the holy grails of all of ocean science, and I would say, if not science. We marvel at the eruption of a volcano on land, and people love going to Yellowstone Park to see Old Faithful. Very similar geologic processes in place there. But on this planet, we have never seen a volcanic eruption at one of these seafloor spreading centers in progress, ever. Not until 2025. And another thing that is really amazing is I'm giving a shout out to Katie Croft Bell and her colleagues at the Ocean Discovery League, because they've just published, I think, a monumental paper that lays out all of the reasons backing up their finding that only 0.001% of the deep seafloor has been visually observed.
Wow.
So 99.99% of the deep ocean has not been seen by us. So, my goodness.
It blows my mind because I will still hear every now and then, oh, there's nothing down there.
Oh, my goodness.
It's a joke.
Yeah.
But you know, it's funny. There's this anthropocentrism, and people think, well, it's dark. We couldn't breathe. It's not very hospitable. It doesn't make special accommodations for us. We have to make special accommodations to go there. And so I do believe that we have an anthropogenic bias, terrestrial bias as a species, that we better get over that pretty quick.
It's totally out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
And at the same time, there is this fascination with outer space. And we must get to Mars. Oh, we must populate the moon. Oh, what about this? What about that? Which is absolutely welcome and wonderful as well. But what about our own planet?
Yeah. It's too much yang, not enough yin.
Yeah.
Can I just say one more thing about the volcanoes? Deborah Kelly, who's one of the scientists I wrote about, who has a deep sea observatory wired up off the Pacific Northwest coast. Something like 170 seafloor instruments report in real time to the internet. And I went out there with her to do maintenance on some of them that are on the axial volcano, which is one of the most prolific volcanoes in the northeastern Pacific. I think it is the most. And they were just desperate to see an eruption. And she said, everywhere the tectonic plates are pulling apart, which is a 40,000 mile long rift in the earth that is continuous active volcanism, there are probably eruptions going off every single day, likely at supersonic speeds. And whenever that happens, they're injecting all this chemistry and all this microbial life into the ocean. We have no idea how any of these processes are happening because we've never seen one. So this breakthrough that Dawn mentioned, it may not sound like a very big deal, but it really is, because without understanding the geochemistry of the Earth, we cannot chart a course through how to withstand climate change.
Absolutely. And Axial may go off this month. So fingers crossed for Deborah and all of our Juan de Fuca Ridge colleagues there.
Where can listeners receive updates about that? Where can they tune into to see if that's happened yet?
Ocean Observatories Initiative.org, I believe, and also University of Washington Regional Cabled Array, it's called.
Exactly.
Yeah, and there's very good updates on that.
And just about any ocean scientist will be sending out posts on Twitter, I refuse to call it X, Blue Sky, LinkedIn, Instagram. If it happens, we will all be talking about it. But you'll be able to get the actual original footage and data from those sites that Susan has mentioned.
One of the last times Axial erupted, the lava flow was 300 feet thick, almost as tall as a Seattle Space Needle. And when Victor and I dived in Hawaii into the active volcano, we saw it looked like giant toothpaste, a giant pillar lava. And just think for a minute of the forces that are at work there to erupt under the pressure of 8,000 or 10,000 or 16,000 pounds per square inch. That's just crazy.
Oh, gosh.
It's amazing. And the thought that there is life on these seamounts, these volcanoes at the deepest parts of our ocean, they must have to have some incredible evolutionary adaptations to survive in the dark, the pressure, the lack of resources and food that you mentioned. Instead of photosynthesis, some of them do chemosynthesis, which is converting different chemicals into energy, which is so fascinating. So Dawn, I'm curious what some of the most intriguing or interesting or out of the ordinary adaptations you saw during your dive on some creatures were.
Well, the chemosynthesis of these organisms at hydrothermal vents is absolutely astounding indeed. And I've had most of my dives to these places to see these tube worms and these clams, the sizes of dinner plates, and various types of shrimp. All of those creatures there. But having been to Challenger Deep now, that was a new experience for me. I'd never been to that tectonic setting. And I became fascinated with the snailfish. And another shout out to Victor, because he has just recently declared with great love in his heart that snailfish are his favorite type of deep sea creature, given all the places that he has gone. But the robots that accompanied Victor and I to Challenger Deep saw these snailfish at around 7,396 meters. That's the depth stamp of the resting place of one of the landers. And their adaptations are fascinating to me. Now, I am not a biologist. I am a marine geologist. But these fish, they have transparent skin. And this is part of the story that's evolving about why they are the way that they are. They live at this tremendous depth under this tremendous pressure in complete darkness. They have transparent skin, but they have eyes. Why do they need eyes in this darkness? What are their other senses? But with the skin, you can look at them and you can see their internal organs. You can see their livers.
Wow.
As they swim by. If you look at them in a sample, once they're brought back to the surface, you can look straight through their skull and you can see the brain. And what are these high pressure adaptations that they have? And the fish that we saw were about 12 inches long. They're quite large. They have a skeleton that's made out of cartilage instead of bone, so that helps with the pressure. They have a small pressure stabilizing molecule, apparently, called TMAO, trimethylamine oxide, that helps them keep their cellular machinery working under such high pressure. In fact, this chemical degasses from the fish when they're brought to the surface. I've learned a lot about this from HADO biologists, such as Mackenzie Geringer and Alan Jameson and Paige, I was going to say Paige Beckers. She's a basketball player. But Paige, oh my goodness, I'm blanking on her last name, but she is one of the amazing scientists who works at the University of Western Australia with Alan Jameson. At any rate, that blew my mind.
So I'm so curious, now that you mention deep sea creatures having eyes in complete darkness, so the lack of pigmentation makes sense. They're not seen. There's nothing to camouflage against in the deep, dark ocean. But why on earth would these creatures have eyes?
There's all kinds of pigmentation in the upper layers of the deep ocean, and even in the hadal zone. It's not every creature that lacks pigmentation. And also, even snailfish don't, because they just discovered, bizarrely, vibrant indigo blue snailfish. Most of them are pink and this sort of translucent peachy, but it's this gel. I don't know where the blue comes from. Maybe it's a protein and it's not pigment, but there's a certain type of fish in the twilight zone that has a very strange pigment in its skin that causes it to absorb 99.5% of all light it encounters. So it's not just black, it's ultra black. It's like a swimming silhouette. I think what's really interesting is there's all kinds of different strategies. Some creatures have large, oversized eyes. The giant squid has the largest eyes of all. And it could be that it's an adaptation to be able to catch the trails of bioluminescence that would occur if a sperm whale is streaking towards you. There are fish that have eyes that can rotate in opposite directions, and they're different sizes. And with the snailfish, I often wonder with the hadal snailfish, it's just not finished evolving, perhaps because it's also my favorite fish in the ocean. And it wasn't even Ellen Jamieson described this to me. I'm not only not a biologist, I'm not a scientist, so I always look at this in terms of very layman terms, but they were a shallow water fish that evolved over about 11 million years, which is warp speed, basically, to be the deepest fish in the ocean. And they can't go to the absolute depths that Dawn went to because the TMAO in their cells is fully saturated right now. They have as much of it as they can, and it acts like scaffolding to keep the cells from imploding. But they may be still going, because they've evolved, for example, 2 mouths. So when they eat an amphipod, they'll suck in this amphipod, and then there's a mouth behind it that crushes it, because if you're made of gel and you eat an amphipod, which has claws, it will just eat its way out of your head. So the very deepest fish in the ocean has evolved to be down there very fast and has no predators. So I think they're still going. But I do really love the fact that the gnarliest predator in the most hostile environment on Earth is a pink gummy bear. And perhaps in the future, they won't need eyes.
It's so amazing because with these snailfish, we also saw these blood red prawn-like creatures. We could go on and on. I would just like to shout out Paige Maroney, one of Alan Jamieson's postdocs and their colleagues. They have a Deep Sea UWA on Instagram, where you can see these.
They are doing just absolutely groundbreaking work. I often look at 2019 because of Victor, because of Alan Jamieson and the science crew, because of that submersible Triton built, was like the before and after of us being able to explore the hadal zone. And they're just going at it full steam ahead. Parts of the ocean that people have never been to, let alone seen.
And you both have called the deep ocean the last unexplored frontier. So it's great to hear about these upcoming innovations and technologies that are allowing us to not only visit the deep ocean, but to map it, to understand it, and to protect it better. So I have, I think, one final question, or maybe two, if we have time. I'm really curious about the effects that climate change and human activity have on the deep ocean. We might think, oh, it's so deep that we can't possibly have an impact on it. But I'm curious from your experiences of traveling into the deeper ocean, if you've noticed human impacts.
Our dive was co-opted by the discovery of a beer bottle. As soon as Victor and I got to the bottom of Challenger Deep in the Western Pool, and that is the one transmission from our dive that went viral. Despite the beautiful biology and the amazing tectonic boulder field that we saw, and our messaging about the totality of the ocean's transmittal of heat and how important that is for weather and climate, it was the beer bottle that just, if you'll pardon the expression, sucked the oxygen out of everything. And that the beer bottle was the clarion call, though. It's been useful to us because it's been helpful to really drive home the point that we are trashing this planet, even to the point of being able to find a beer bottle in Challenger Deep or these other places where Susan and I have had the chance to go in a submersible. So there's the trashing of the ocean, which is a huge issue. The microplastics, Alan Jamieson and colleagues discovered a new species that they called Erythenes plasticus. It's a amphipod that already has human-made microplastics already entrained in its tissues. So it is the type species to show us what our activities are doing to the planet. There is the ever-present problem of greenhouse gas emissions that are reducing the oxygen that's in the ocean, that's increasing the acidity of the ocean, and all of the effects that the ocean pays the price for. The ocean is actually the front lines of buying us time as it absorbs heat, as it absorbs greenhouse gases, but the damage to the ecosystems, to our commercial fish stocks, the impacts of more severe storms, all of that is absolutely crippling right now. And I'll go as far as saying, as the destruction of science in the United States and the withdrawal of the infrastructure, the funding that we need in order to monitor, not just to make new discoveries, but just to monitor and to keep people safe. That to me is one of the most dangerous, destructive, scariest things that's happening right now.
Thank you for mentioning that, Dawn. And I just want to put out there, we have global listeners, and right now, based in the US, I just have hope that other countries can make up for the slack from us. And I hope that seeing a bottle at the bottom of the deepest point in the ocean, that should be a wake-up call for everybody. Sorry, Susan, go ahead.
I just want to emphasize what Dawn said. Last spring, I went on an Alvin cruise with Samantha Joy from the University of Georgia. It was microbiologists and virologists to a place in the Gulf of California called Guaymas Basin. And it's very microbially interesting because it's on a spreading center and it has been studied extensively. It's one of those places that microbiologists spend their careers dreaming of going because it's a one-of-a-kind set of circumstances that have created it. And the one thing that I don't think the average person necessarily thinks about is that there's a huge amount of methane locked up in the seafloor in the form of methane hydrates, which are little sequestered methane in little ice balls. They are all over the continental shelves. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but the amount of methane, it dwarfs the amount of other fossil fuels that are on Earth. It's just locked up in these ice crystals that are kept in their ice state by a combination of temperature and pressure. So as the glaciers melt, if we add an inch to the ocean in terms of sea level rise, it's a huge amount of weight, but we're also warming it. So at what point do those hydrates degas, basically come apart? So in the Guaymas Basin, we saw evidence at 2,000 meters of huge craters where methane had blown out of the seafloor. And if you think back to that, it was spring 2024, there was a huge amount of anomalous ocean temperatures around. People were in the ocean. It was 100 degrees off the coast of Florida. It was like a jacuzzi. We now know that that heat is getting to depths a little quicker than was expected in the circulation. And if these methane hydrates are to destabilize, that could lead to degassing of the methane. We don't know what would happen. Methane, of course, is a much more potent greenhouse gas than CO2. And also, those methane hydrates stabilize continental shelves. So when I was researching my book, The Wave, about giant waves, if methane hydrates start to release, you can have giant slumps that create mega tsunamis. Climate change is going to be focused in the ocean. And the ocean, when it tips or when a feedback loop becomes big enough, has a way of making our day very unpleasant, terminally unpleasant, possibly.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And thank you so much, Susan, for bringing up the methane hydrates, because we never hear about this in the media, in the popular press. Even as scientists, we don't talk about this enough, I think. And Mandy Joy's work is absolutely stunningly wonderful. But for goodness sake, the whole idea also of shutting down our observing systems that are keeping tabs on this. We have an integrated ocean observing system in this country that is currently under threat. And we are crippling ourselves in terms of getting the real-time data and maps that we need to navigate treacherous harbors, to plot tsunami escape routes, to predict hurricane intensity, to guide floating warehouses full of goods, full of Christmas presents, Halloween presents, birthday presents that we need into the docks of our ports. What are we doing? What are we doing here?
We're willfully flying blind.
Yeah, we need to be calling our congressman.
So that's a great segue to our conclusion here. Now, the deep ocean, most people won't be lucky enough in their lives to see it in person, to go down and see the volcanoes and the spreading zones and all of this beautiful and mysterious and crazy otherworldly life at the bottom of the ocean. But what do you think is one thing everyone can do to either feel more connected to the ocean or to help protect it, especially the deepest parts?
You can experience it. There's so many ways to experience the ocean and to know more deeply that your life depends on it. And this is, I think, an important message in both of our books, in Susan's book certainly, and in mine as well. And I mentioned the Instagram account, Deep Sea UWA. There's also Schmidt Ocean. Mappingthedeep.com is the site that accompanies my book that has any number of videos and maps where you can feel as though you have visited these places, and you have. It hasn't been in person, but it's a very, very powerful way to understand the totality of our planet, and also to understand the organizations such as our National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and organizations such as Sylvia Earle's Mission Blue. There's so many organizations where you can give of your time. You can visit some of these marine parks. You can give, you can donate your time with their activities, and also just to live as sustainably as you can. Don't use plastic straws anymore. Talk about these issues with your family and friends. A couple of really simple things.
Susan, do you have any advice for listeners?
If you're drawn to the ocean and you love the ocean, make her a priority in your life. I mean, obviously, it's great to get into the ocean. You don't have to go into the Hadal Zone. You can snorkel over a reef and there's a parallel universe down there. And the second you break the surface, you're a part of it. If you scuba dive, I've had many scientists tell me that these blackwater dives that they do at night off the coast of Kona, but also I've heard they're in other places, including Florida, you go down to about 60 feet and hang on a rope, and the creatures from the Twilight Zone make a vertical migration daily. And by the way, that's a huge biological carbon pump that sucks down the equivalent of America's total annual emissions each year. But they're these crazy, beautiful creatures. And I've had people say that that's the closest thing to being in a submersible that they have experienced are these blackwater night dives. And there is a huge amount of content online, but nothing really replaces being in the water. And you don't have to be deep. Understand and know and learn and revel in the ocean if you love her.
I would encourage all of our listeners to go read The Underworld by Susan Casey and Mapping the Deep by Don Wright. Both of these helped me feel really connected to the deep ocean in a way that I personally never have. So thank you both for this conversation, for the work that you do, for the storytelling that you share with the world to bring people closer to a place that might otherwise be very unreachable.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Katie. This was delightful. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Dawn.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Seakeepers Voyages of Discovery. Join us next time for a behind-the-scenes look at Seabed 2030 and the global mission to map the ocean floor by the end of the decade. Until then, fair winds and following seas.